Today's daf is daf Yudalid, and we start with the Mishnah. Hashochet b'Shabbos u'v'Yom Kippurim. Afal pisha mischayev ben nafsho. Now, shchita is one of the 39 malachos, which generate a chiyuv misa, which means if you did it be'mezid in front of two edim and with asra, you get skila in the case of Shabbos. In the case of Yom Kippur, you chayv kares. But here in the Mishnah, Tosfos points out, at least according to one interpretation of the Mishnah, that we're dealing with a shogeg. So he's not really chayiv kares or skila, but mischayev benafsho means he's guilty of a maisa avera, which had it been done b'mezid would be mischayev benafsho, and nevertheless shchitas kshera. Now, why does Tosfos assume that we can't interpret this Mishnah literally, that he did it b'mezid? And the answer is because then he becomes a Rasha and a Mumar, and his shchita is not valid. But if on the other hand he did it b'shogeg, then his shchita is a shchita kshera. So you'll take a quick peek at the Tosfos on the top of the page here. Tosfos says, Ibe mezid hech shchita kshera v'amumar l'chal b'Shabbos asur. He can't eat from the shchita. So Tosfos offers a number of answers, one of which is b'shogeg, another is that he didn't do this action b'farhesia, but rather he did it b'tzin in private. And also Tosfos offers an answer that maybe on the first time around, even if he was b'mezid, he doesn't become a mumar, and we could still eat from the meat of his shchita. And then we have the answer of shogeg. Now the Gemara says the following: Omer Rav Huna Dorish Chia Barav Mishmei Derav. Now this transmission in the name of Rav is going to be the subject of today's daf. Asura Bachila Liyoma. On the day of Shabbos, or the day, right, on the day of Shabbos, because Yom Kippur you can't eat anyway, but on the day of Shabbos, you're not allowed to eat the meat. And the question is, why not? So later on, which is going to be tomorrow's daf, we'll talk about what's called a Maseches Shabbos. So you can't benefit from any action that violates the Shabbos during the course of Shabbos itself, even if it was implemented b'shogeg. But that's very futuristic. We're really far away from that. But rather, the Gemara says that Naspin Chavrai Lememar Rabbi Yehuda, that the Chabura of Talmidei Chachamim, when they heard this transmission in the name of Rav, they assume that Rav was referring to the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. And now the rest of our daf is an attempt to try to understand what statement of Rabbi Yehuda would warrant that we attribute our Mishnah the way Rav interprets it, that you're only allowed to eat the meat tomorrow, but not on Shabbos itself, to Rabbi Yehuda. Hey, Rabbi Yehuda, what statement and what opinion, or shall we say what ruling, is Rabbi Yehuda known for that would justify Rav's premise that you cannot eat the meat on Shabbos? Now, just by way of introduction, a lot of what we're going to do today on Daf Yudal, it has to do with the laws of Muktzah and the laws of Nolad. Nolad is a little bit of a branch of Muktzah, but a very specific branch of Muktzah. Now, what exactly is the issue of Muktzah? Everybody assumes, well, we all know about Muktzah, but we don't. Because Muktzah is really a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, two Tanoim. And generally speaking, when you have machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda in Hilchos Shabbos, Rabbi Shimon is the Mekil and Rabbi Yehuda is the Machmir, which is good for us today because if Rabbi Yehuda is machmir on muktzah, then we can understand that if we can somehow establish that the meat that was shechted on Shabbos is muktzah, then it reflects the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda as the Gemara understood Rav's statement. And Omer Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Yehuda dahachonahi. Now it's very interesting that when we talk about Rabbi Yehuda as the primary machmir, the one who takes a strict position in muktzah, we use the term hachana, because that really reveals the whole secret. The whole secret of muktzah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is inherent in the word hachana. Hachana means, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon rejects this understanding. Torah says, "V'yichinu es asher yaviu," you have to prepare for Shabbos. And Rabbi Yehuda understands that you actually have to, in a positive sense, prepare for Shabbos. Anything that was not prepared for Shabbos use, for example, the meat of an animal that's alive on Erev Shabbos, and we didn't anticipate it would be slaughtered on Shabbos, is lacking hachana. It hasn't been designated for Shabbos. Hachana, according to Rabbi Yehuda, means to designate it for Shabbos. Now, if you take Rabbi Yehuda to an extreme, but of course what I'm about to say is not correct, then on Erev Shabbos, according to Rabbi Yehuda, I have to go around to everything in the house and say, well, I am preparing this for Shabbos. But Rabbi Yehuda holds that you don't have to actually bekumva say actively go ahead and prepare everything for Shabbos and point to it and say, I'm going to use this table, I'm going to use this book, I'm going to use this chair. But rather, anything that we can anticipate will be used on Shabbos. For example, it has a shem kli, or a shem ochel, or a shem mashke. Anything that is mutter to use on Shabbos or to eat on Shabbos, benefit from a Shabbos, that's considered muchan. It's as if you had gone ahead and designated for Shabbos. Tisnan. And now we're going to learn a Mishnah in Maseches Shabbos. And the Mishnah records machlokes regarding food for animals. And the first daya, the Tanakama, this Mishnah represents the Shita Rab Shimon, who's Mekil and Muktzah, and therefore he holds Mechatchin es hadiluin lifnei behema. So we have certain kind of animal foods, gourds, called diluim, dlas, and we're allowed to cut them up, according to Tanakama, on Shabbos. Again, they were already harvested before Shabbos. And we're going to feed them to the behemoths. V'yes hanavela, and if you have a carcass of an animal that died without shechita, which you can't eat, it's not permissible for human consumption, but you can feed it to your dogs. And what happened? Did this animal drop dead on Shabbos? If it was alive on Erev Shabbos, then you didn't prepare it for animal food on Erev Shabbos. You didn't have any idea that this animal was going to drop dead. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, since you did not anticipate that you would have a dead carcass on Shabbos, therefore, it doesn't have hachana. And if it lacks hachana, because you didn't anticipate that it would be available for feeding your dog on Shabbos, and Erev Shabbos you looked at the animal and you saw a live animal, therefore it's muktzah. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im lo hoisan avel me'erev Shabbos, if the animal did not drop dead before Shabbos, asura, you can't cut it up for the animals. Why not? Because as we said before, you're guilty until proven innocent, meaning unless you have a positive hachana or a mindset that this is mutter, you're allowed to eat this, you're allowed to eat that. This is food, this is drink, this is table, this is chairs, this is fork, etc., etc. Then otherwise it becomes muktzah because it's lacking hachana. A live animal, says Rabbi Yehuda, which is alive when you enter into Shabbos, is muktzah. There's no hachana. Alma kaven de lo itzchan me esmol. We see that what underlies Rabbi Yehuda Shita is the logic that if you did not prepare it on Erev Shabbos, then therefore Asura becomes prohibited on Shabbos. Now, exactly the nature of that prohibition, whether it's Doraisa, Rabbanan, we're going to assume now it's Doraisa. And not only that, we're going to assume it includes even moving the object, and certainly not cutting it up and feeding it to the dog. It's Hachinami, going back to our Mishnah, where he shechted an animal on Shabbos, and now he wants to eat it on Shabbos, is Kevon Dulo Itchan Me Esmol Asura. He did not anticipate, Chas v'sholom, that somebody would shech this animal on Shabbos, and therefore it's lacking Hachana. Now, truth be told, and again, this is not for a blotchi or a daf yomi shir, but even Rab Shimon agrees that there's muktzah, although the Gemara quotes Rab Shimon over and over again throughout Masechta Shabbos as saying, less lei Rab Shimon muktzah, but nevertheless, Rab Shimon does have muktzah. But Rab Shimon would only hold of muktzah when you had a positive act of being makatzeh, meaning when you did something with it, with the object, to indicate that you do not want to have any use of the object on Shabbos. For example, the Gemara is going to say that Reb Shimon is modeh in a case of a kli shemachmas chisaron kiss. I'll give an example of, let's say, a dentist, right? There's certain tools that a dentist uses, to pick out the teeth until he fills the tooth and so forth. Those tools are very expensive, very sensitive tools. They have to be absolutely sharp. He doesn't want anyone playing around with them. These are not toys. He locks them up. And by locking them up, he's makatze biyadayim, and that's the muktzah that even Rabbi Shimon accepts. But there's a large gap between a positive hachana and maktzeh biyadayim. So there are many things that did not have a positive hachana, meaning you didn't really anticipate using it, but you weren't maktzeh biyadayim. You didn't say, well, I'm locking this up because I don't want anyone to have access to it. Or, for example, let's say you have very rare collection of gold coins or something like that. So that even Reb Shimon would accept, because that's chisaron kiss, that's something that you lock up. You don't want anyone to play around with these expensive documents or monies or whatever it might be. But in a case where you didn't have hachana, where you didn't anticipate that you would actually use it on Shabbos, but you could theoretically use it on Shabbos, that's going to be the machlokes between Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda is going to say, well, if you didn't anticipate using it on Shabbos, then there was no hachana. And in the absence of hachana, makes it muktzah, because the Torah requires hachana. Reb Shimon would say, no, I don't need a positive hachana. I just cannot exclude it and be makatze biyadayim. And the machlokas, for example, is going to be tamar de isko. Let's say you are a farmer and you sell dates, right? Tamarim. And what you do is you pack up the tamarim for shipping it out to the market. And then, lo and behold, on Friday night or Shabbos afternoon, whatever it was, you realize there are no dates on the table. So you need tamarim. Are you allowed to go into your packaged dates, which were packaged for the purpose of marketing to make yourself a parnasa, and use that on your table? Reb Shimon says yes. Why? Because Reb Shimon holds that although you didn't anticipate using it, but nevertheless it's an ochel, it's royal achila, and therefore you could put it on your table and eat it. But Rabbi Yehuda says, well, if you didn't anticipate using it, then it doesn't have hachana. And the absence of hachana generates muktzah, according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Mela, in our Mishnah, the Gemara argues that Rabbi Yehuda would not allow you to eat the meat of an animal that was shechted on Shabbos. Clearly, Reb Shimon, again, it's a real borderline case here about Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon l'chora could also maybe in this case say it's like he was makatze b'yadayim because the Torah prohibits you from shechting an animal on Shabbos. But according to Reb Shimon, the Gemara would understand that maybe he anticipates in the back of his mind the possibility that somehow, I don't know exactly how, somebody's going to shech this animal on Shabbos. Amalei Abai. So Abai says now to Rabbi Abba the following: Mi dummy. Is your analogy precise? Hasam mei karamuchan li adam. In the case of something that could be used for human consumption, you would not anticipate giving it to a dog, and that's called in the Lashon Hashas muchan li adam eino muchan leklavim. It's hashta muchan leklavim, right? You want to say that the carcass is mukta, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Why it's lacking hachana? Why is it lacking hachana? Because it was a live animal erev Shabbos. It dropped dead on Shabbos. If you would have asked him, what are you going to do with this animal? If you would have asked him on erev Shabbos, he would have said, for sure, I'm going to wait till Sunday. I'm going to shecht it, and I'm going to eat it, and it's designated for human consumption. I mean, you get a whole bunch of steaks over here. You get naf on Yom Ha'atzmaut. You get a lot of good things out of this meat. Who's going to take this meat and feed it to his dogs? So that's lacking hachana. But hacha here, in our case, meikara muchan li adam, v'hashta muchan li adam. What was he anticipating going into Shabbos? He was anticipating that on Sunday he would shech the animal and use it for his barbecue and use it for human consumption. And that's exactly what he wants to do today on Shabbos. Again, he didn't anticipate that he would shecht it or anyone else would shecht it, but nevertheless it was muchan li adam. So when does Rabbi Yehuda prohibit something because of the lack of achana? That's only if it's muchan li adam, and therefore it's not muchan li klavin. I mean, that what you get in the dog pet shop to feed your dogs costs a fraction of what you'd pay for steaks, for human consumption, especially if you want to get, she'eris or kihilos or badats or whatever your favorite hechsher is. So Rabbi Abba comes back and he says the following: Mi savras behema v'chayel achilach omes behema v'chayel legadol omes. When you would ask him on Erev Shabbos, what are you going to do with this animal? His response is not going to be, I'm going to shecht it on Sunday. The animal is worth a lot more alive than it is geshachted, because as a live animal, it could produce other animals. It could also serve as a work animal. And surely a live animal is worth a lot more in the market than even after shechita. Although, again, you got a lot of steak here from this ox, from this bull, but nevertheless, you want it to be alive. So he didn't anticipate that he would feed it as, and designate as consumption because it's a live animal, and Erev Shabbos asking what he's going to do with it. He's going to use it legadil. He's going to use it to breed. He breeds animals. And therefore, Rabbi Abba argues against Abaye that Rabbi Yehuda would certainly prohibit a situation where a live animal was shechted on Shabbos because there's no achana, and Rabbi Yehuda would ask it. So basically, Rabbi Abba is saying to Abaye, why are you chepping with me on? So Abaye still goes back and fights. Right, we have a Mishnah in Masechta Beitza that tells us that you're allowed to shecht on Yontif. And what are you going to do after the shechita? You're going to eat the meat and fulfill the mitzvah of Simchas Yontif. But wait a second. Ask him what on Erev Yontif was he anticipating. And Rabbi Abba's answer to that was he anticipates keeping the animal well fed and alive so that the animal will be we could breed the animal and produce more animals. So then it should be books on Yontif. How are you allowed to shecht and eat an animal on Yontif? Omalo, Rabbi Abba goes back into the fighting rink, and he says, you know what? That omedes lachila ve'omedes legadel. Truth be told, that if you would have asked him on Erev Yontif, what's he going to do with this live animal? He would give you two answers. He would say, you know what? I don't know. I got two options here. I may indeed want to keep it alive and breed the animal, or alternatively, I may decide I want the meat for my yontif table. So therefore, he has a double hachana. Now, it's Rabbi Abba is saying to Abaye, it's not one to the exclusion of the other, but rather you can have two alternatives, and both are in his das for hachana. Now, what at the end of the day does this man really want to do with his animal? Yeah, we said that on Erev Yontif he has like an either or kind of mentality, a kavan. But what was his really intention? So the Gemara says the following. This is all Rabbi Abba. Nishchata, if he goes ahead and makes a decision, I'm going to shech the animal on Yontif, and you're allowed to shech the animal on Yontif because it's a malacha litzarech ochal nefesh, which Torah allows on Yontif. Then huvara de la chilo medes. Here we have to underline the word huvara. Huvara is a conjugated word of the noun brera. Brera means when later on I decide what my original intention was. And it works with what we call a mafreya retroactively. That's called brera. Lo nishchata. If he decides, you know what? I don't need any extra meat here. I got plenty of steaks here. I got plenty of food here for Yontif. I'm going to definitely want to keep this animal alive, well fed, and breed the animal. Then, huvra de lagadel omedes. So basically, according to Rabbi Abba, the intention of a person and whether it was muchan or not will depend upon brera. And later on, there's going to be a brera, and he's going to decide whether he wants to do this with it or that. So the entire heter of shechting an animal on Yontif, according to Rabbi Abba's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, is all predicated on brera. And the Gemara now is going to reject Rabbi Abba's very basic premise that Rabbi Yehuda accepts the principle of brera, because this is a gigantic controversy throughout Shas, whether or not a person's undefined intention can be defined later on, and that operates l'mafreya. When I say l'mafreya, I got to go back to Erev Shabbos, because ultimately, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the only way I could allow this is if I tell you that on Erev Shabbos he had such an intention. But the truth is he hasn't really decided yet, and therefore his decision will be made later on. But that's not good. I need a decision on Erev Shabbos, or Erev Yontif in this case, in order to set up hachana. So the Gemara says, Holes leila Rabbi Yehuda brera. Rabbi Yehuda never accepted brera. So you can't tell me that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the permissibility of shechting an animal on Erev Yontif is based on the fact that on Yontif, he's going to make a decision that he wants to shecht the animal for its meat, and that's going to operate limafreya retroactively and set up his intention and create a hachana on Erev Yontif. He can't say that, because Rabbi Yehuda never accepted the principle of brera. When a person has to make a decision, and we have to determine halachically what his intention is, it's got to be made now. It can't be something that, well, depends upon later on, and then I'll decide. Minolan. How do you know, asks the Gemara very innocently, that Rabbi Yehuda rejects brera? And now what the Gemara is going to do, it's almost like a sugya within it, a sugya. We're going to now try to figure out from whence we can possibly derive the conclusion that Rabbi Yehuda rejects brera, which will bring us back to the original question, how Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Abba at least, will justify shechita on Yontif, because Rabbi Yehuda requires hachan. So how do we know, really? Let's be honest about it. How do we know that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no such thing as brera? The Sanya, if you want to say, comes from the following brisa. Now, the subject of this brisa is hafrashas trumos umasros. And brera, whether yesh brera or ain brera, is a very fundamental plays a very fundamental role in the issue of hafrashas trumas u'maisos. Why? Because very often you want to drink from something, let's say, that requires hafrashas trumas or maasros, but you haven't yet actually made the hafrasha. So you didn't separate that which goes to the Kohen from that which you want to drink for yourself. But can you make a stipulation that, you know what, I'm going to decide tomorrow which wine is designated as true? Halokech yayin mi bein hakusim. Now, if you're buying wine for the kusim, the premise is that the kusi was not mafresh trumas and maasros. He's not such a fruma yid. And therefore, what do you do if you want to be mafresh and be matir that, let's say, wine that you bought, in this case, from kusim, but you don't have the ability to do so right now. Let's say you don't have utensils. You need one kli for that which is chullin, another kli for that which is truma, and you don't have that. It's not accessible. Omer. This is Rabbi Meir's opinion that we're learning now, and Rabbi Yehuda is going to reject it, but let's go with Rabbi Meir the Tanakam. He says the following: make this declaration. Shnei lugim shani osid lahafresh harein truma. Let's say he has 100 lugim of yayin, and the midah beininus, the average person, gives for truma 2%, right? 1/50. Now, 1/50 for 100 lugim is 2 lugim. That's 2%. And asid ani lisa, I haven't yet been able to separate it, but in the future, down the line, tomorrow, the day after, I will be mafresh those 2 lugim for truma. And asara maser rishon, every year of the 6 years of the Shemitah cycle requires hafrashas maser rishon for the Levi, and 10 lugim. Now, the truth is, it's not really 10 lugim, because it's 9.8 lugim, if you follow what I mean. You have to subtract 2 lugim from the 100 lugim, because that's truma, and then you're left with 98 lugim, and you give 10% of 98 lugim for maser, and that I'm going to be mafresh tomorrow. And tisha maser sheni. Okay, now theoretically we're down to 90, which is again not accurate, but let's say we're down to 90 lugim after you got rid of 10 for the designated 10 for the Levi, and now we get to Maser Sheni. Right, so Maser Sheni is on the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th years of the Shemitah cycle, the exclusion of 3 and 6. Anyway, so now he says, you know what? There's going to be another 9 out of 90 lugim, which is again 10% for Maser Sheni and Umechel. And then he does a chil on the Maser Sheni, and he's machal it onto coin. So he doesn't have to worry about, schlepping the Maser Sheni up all the way up to Yerushalayim. He's down in Beersheba. V'shosam miyad. The Rameh says you can drink it already now. Haka Shem Tevel. How is he mafkir the Shem Tevel? I mean, he hasn't yet been mafresh yet. But the answer is Yesh Brera. Because he's going to drink today, that's going to be Chullin, and we'll know it's Chullin because tomorrow he's going to be mafresh some other wine that he didn't drink, obviously, for Truma, Maser Rishon, Maser Shem. However, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Shimon Osrim, whole line of Tanoim rejected this. And apparently the reason is because they reject the principle of Brera. You cannot determine tomorrow which yayin is Truma, Maser, Maser Rishon, Maser Sheni today. It doesn't work l'mafrei. It doesn't work retroactive. Is Mamela, if this be the case, Rabbi Yehuda's name is on the list as those who rejected Brera. If Rabbi Yehuda rejected Brera, then we're in deep trouble over here, because admittedly, when he saw the animal on Erev Yontiv, he didn't know whether he's going to shecht it on Yontiv, and he's going to apply the principle of Brera to determine on Yontif whether he's going to shecht it and eat the animal, and therefore was Muchan and Erev Yontif Lamafreya through the principle of Brera, but Rav Yehuda rejects Brera, and therefore was back to square one. How could Rav Yehuda allow shechting an animal on Yontif?